this lecture, we're going to build out the responder for the list checks command. Now, list checks actually takes in two optional flags. So let's review the syntax by looking at the man page. We're going to start up the app and then say help. List checks allows you to state --up or --down. But both are optional. If you don't include either flag, it will just show you all of the checks. So let's go ahead and start building this out. I'm going to remove the default console log. And now the first thing we want to do is just list out the checks. So we're going to use our data library, list checks. It'll pass us back an error and an array of check IDs. If there's no error and check IDs is truthy, and check IDs has a length greater than 0, then we want to continue. The first thing that we'll do is enter a vertical space before we start running through each of these checks to separate out this response from any other previous responses. Now, for each of the check IDs, we want to run through a loop that will give us the check ID individually, and then we want to read the data for that check ID. So we want to read checks and pass it check ID and expect back an error and check data. Now at this point, we need to decide whether or not this is a check that should be included in our response to the user. We want to default to false, so I'm going to say include check. It's going to default to false. Now let's push the string down to lowercase. We're going to say that lower string equals str to lowercase. If they included --up or --down with uppercase, we don't want to miss it. So we're going to push everything down to lowercase before we go looking for those strings. Now we want to get the state of the check, but default to down. So the state of the check is type of check data state equals string. If so, we'll use it, or we'll consider it down. If it doesn't have a state yet, then the state is unknown, but for the purposes of this admin tool, we would consider that state to be down. And then that is the state that we're going to filter on to know whether or not to include this check. But when we write out the checks, we want to lump in unknowns with the downs. So we also want to get this state in a way that will default to unknown if there is no state. So we're going to say var state or unknown is going to equal this same logic but defaulting to unknown. And I'm just going to add a comment here, get the state default to unknown. And you'll see the way that we use these two different variables in this next section. So if the user has specified the state or hasn't specified any state, include the current check accordingly. So we're going to say that if the lower string index of --state, because remember the state that we defined here can only either be up or down. The word unknown isn't there. We're trying to find out if when the user specified to list checks, they included the string --up or --down. So if lower string includes --state, or the lower string doesn't include the words down or up, so we're going to say or lower string index of --down equals -1, and lower string index of --up equals -1, then we want to log this out. So in other words, if the state that we read from this check when we were defaulting to down is included in the flags that the user set in the console as an input, then we want to continue. The only other case in which we want to continue is if the user didn't specify dash dash down or dash dash up, in which case all things should be included. So now we want to create the line that we're going to log out. So var line equals, it's going to start with ID and then check data ID. Then we're going to spell out the method and the URL and the state of the check. So we're going to say check data method to uppercase, and then check data protocol. Then we're going to add on : and then the URL. Lastly, we want to include the state, and for that we will use state or unknown, because when we're writing these out, we do want to lump in unknown things with the down checks, but we do want to specify that they're actually unknown, not down. So now we want to log out this line and then include a vertical space afterwards. So that's the whole list checks function. Let's start it up and try it out. I'm going to say list checks, and I'm not going to specify a flag. You can see we're hitting an error that checks IDs is not defined at 237. That is because this array is returning check IDs, and I'm calling it checks IDs. So we just need to correct that. Start the app back up. Try again. List checks with no flag, and you see that we have a number of checks. They're all spelled out with their ID, method, protocol, : and then the URL, and their current state. You can see that some of them are down and some of them are up. So let's ask again, list checks dash dash up. Now we're just getting these three that are up. Let's try list checks dash dash down. And we're just getting the three that are down. So everything seems to be working fine. We can kill this application and move on to the next lecture.